Writing for Forbes, Aviva Wittenberg-Cox says that the female leaders of Iceland, Taiwan, Germany, New Zealand, Finland, Iceland, and Denmark had the best responses to COVID-19. She says that these female leaders can teach us something that male leaders can't. There are 4 lessons she calls out, and I think you'll agree that all of these are unique to women and women only. Truth, decisiveness, tech, and love. That's right, that's what little girls are made of. Sorry, boys, only our half of the population gets love. You can have another emotion, like Schadenfreude or something. Wittenberg-Cox points out that Germany's female leader displayed truth by admitting publicly that the virus was serious and would infect up to 70% of the population. I mean, okay. There are other nations helmed by men who definitely lied and obfuscated on that point, notably China and the United States, but those seem to be the outliers. I think pretty much everyone who isn't a fascist was openly saying, oh shit. Wittenberg-Cox next says that decisiveness was illustrated by Taiwan, Taiwan's female leader, who she says acted early. Taiwan actually suffered a little bit because they failed to ban mass gatherings or restrict travel to and from Wuhan like Singapore did. They did manage to get their shit together eventually, but there was a delay, so I'm not positive why this is considered decisive while, say, South Korea isn't. South Korea was hit by a religious cult passing around the disease like the collection plate, but they jumped on it so quickly with such extensive testing that they almost immediately flattened their curve before most countries outside of Asia had even decided whether or not to start hoarding toilet paper. But South Korea's prime minister is a man, so let's just forget they exist. Speaking of South Korea, Wittenberg-Cox points out that Iceland's female leader demonstrated tech by testing 5 times more people than South Korea. That's true, actually. Iceland is testing loads of people, and that's great. However, they can't test everyone. There aren't enough tests or personnel to run those tests sooner than within the next year. So while the extensive testing has helped Iceland possibly flatten their curve, some experts are still critical of Iceland for not closing schools or stopping tourists from entering the country, or for taking all the way until the end of March to ban social gatherings. Note that I'm not pointing out these problems to say that any of these female leaders had a bad response to this. This is a hopefully once-in-a-lifetime pandemic, and there isn't going to be a perfect response. All these leaders listened to expert advisors and then made the choices that they thought were best. And the only way we can really criticize them is in retrospect. Wittenberg-Cox's final trait is love, which she illustrates with the female prime minister of Norway, who held a talk just to explain the virus to children. That was, I agree, an awesome idea. She writes, generally, the empathy and care which all of these female leaders have communicated seems to come from an alternate universe than the one we have gotten used to. It's like their arms are coming out of their videos to hold you close in a heartfelt and loving embrace. Who knew leaders could sound like this? Now we do. Jesus fucking Christ, this drives me nuts. You may have noticed that I haven't mentioned any of the women's names so far, and that's to illustrate a point. It's fine to make a list of powerful women, of awesome women, of successful women, whatever. But when you tie their worth to the fact that they're women, you erase their identity in favor of focusing on the fact that they're women, and that's why they're successful or powerful or awesome. And that's garbage. I agree that toxic masculinity is a problem. As a society, we reward boys for aggression and we forgive their anger. And we tend to reward girls for their empathy and forgive their weakness. This results in a world where men do tend to have more trouble accessing the great breadth of their emotions without mockery, and a world in which women tend to have trouble showing assertiveness and power without being beaten down and called bitches. But it doesn't mean that women's power is actually in being heartfelt and loving. It means that the entire problem is that we can only see women as heartfelt and loving. That's what a successful woman is to us. All our problems would not be solved if every nation was led by a woman. Women are half of the fucking population. There are 4 billion of us. That means that at least a few billion women are assholes, just like men. For instance, let's take a look at Bangladesh's response to COVID-19. Instead of declaring a national emergency, they declared a holiday. They placed an emphasis on religious response. They held mass gatherings for prayer. No one even knows how many people in Bangladesh are infected right now. Instead of decent social policies and education, they activated the military against the poor. Who made those choices? The person in charge is Sheikh Hasina, a woman. Because some women suck. Margaret Thatcher sucked. Theresa May sucked. Aung San Suu Kyi sucks. The governor of Alabama sucks. Her own lieutenant governor said her response to the pandemic was shit. South Dakota's female governor sucks. She opposed a stay-at-home order and is now dealing with a huge outbreak because she sucks. And even if a leader doesn't outright suck, they're still human. They can make mistakes. Wittenberg Cox didn't mention Singapore for some reason. They're led by a woman, Halima Yacob. Despite the fact that Singapore got a lot of praise for preventing COVID-19 from getting too out of control there. But the problem is that then they did get a little lax. They opened the country back up too early, and they immediately saw a spike in cases. Their leader isn't a messiah. She didn't do a great job at first because she's a woman, and then suddenly she got too manly, and that's why she screwed things up. It's just because she's human. I'm all for pointing out that some great leaders are women, because I do live in a country where more people wanted Donald Trump for president than basically any woman. Well, that's not exactly true. Hillary Clinton did win the popular vote, but it's still true that in general, a mediocre man will make it much further in politics than an accomplished woman. The deck is stacked against women. But these successful female leaders are great because of their individual actions and motivations, not just because they're women. Diversity is great because people's backgrounds do play into how they think and act, but you can't just say that 4 billion people share a particular positive trait, anything that's necessarily just good for being a world leader. Or you can't say that half the population have a trait that is bad for being a world leader. That's just not how humans work. It's infantilizing bullshit. Saying that we should elect women to be world leaders because they love more than men is just more gendered nonsense that leads to people criticizing any female candidate who comes across as too cold or bossy. It's like, wow, in that debate last night, Elizabeth Warren sure had some great ideas for how to eliminate big money from politics, but I just didn't feel like her arms were coming out of the video to hold me close in a heartfelt and loving embrace. So I guess I'll vote for the white dude. I guess all this annoys me because I've spent more than a decade arguing against ideas like women's intuition. Women aren't magical fairies here to improve the world. We're human beings with logic and emotions and good and evil in our hearts, just like men. It does no one any good to fight the patriarchy with magical thinking. Or else one day we're going to accidentally elect the female Hitler because she made us feel all warm and cozy. We can celebrate awesome women for succeeding in an otherwise misogynistic society, but let's not credit their success to their chromosomes or their gender or their personal identity. Those world leaders are doing such a great job because they're smart and determined and compassionate, just like many of their male colleagues.